The crowd gasped as the mother's voice cut through the autumn air like a whip. 28 years old? You lied about your age. Clara Wynne stood frozen on the Red Willow platform, her mail-order bride contract crumpling in her trembling hands. This was supposed to be her new beginning. Instead, it became her most public humiliation. But what happened next would change everything. Stay until the end of this story and comment which city you're watching from. I want to see how far Clara's journey travels across the world. The train's whistle still echoed across the Wyoming plains when Clara Wynne's entire future collapsed in front of 37 witnesses. She had counted them, counted every face turned toward her on that sun-bleached platform, every pair of eyes that watched her stand there in her best blue traveling dress, the one she'd sewn herself by candlelight over 3 weeks, her fingers bleeding from the needle by the time she'd finished the hem. The dress had cost her the last of her savings for the fabric. The hope it represented had cost her everything else. Step forward, let me see you properly. Mrs. Hodges' voice carried the kind of authority that came from owning half the county. She stood like a pillar of judgment in her severe black dress, her son Thomas shuffling awkwardly behind her, barely meeting Clara's eyes. Clara moved forward, her small carpet bag clutched in both hands. The leather handle was worn smooth from her mother's grip, then hers. It was one of the few things she had left from home, from the life that had burned down around her 2 years ago, when the fever took both her parents within a week of each other. 23 years old, you said in your letters. Mrs. Hodges circled Clara like a rancher, appraising livestock, and the comparison made Clara's stomach turn. Light hair, good health, capable of bearing strong sons. Yes, ma'am. Clara's voice came out steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. I can cook, clean, manage a household. I helped run my father's boarding house for 6 years before... Look at me. Clara raised her eyes. Mrs. Hodges stood inches away now, close enough that Clara could smell the lavender water she wore, could see the calculation in those hard gray eyes. The sun, Mrs. Hodges said slowly, reaching out to touch the corner of Clara's eye, where the skin crinkled when she smiled. It's left its mark on you. These lines. Thomas, come here. The young man, and he was young. Clara realized with a sinking heart, perhaps only 20. Himself stepped forward reluctantly. He had kind eyes, she noticed. Weak, perhaps, but kind. Thomas, look at her eyes. Look carefully. The boy. Because that's what he was really. Just a boy glanced at Clara and immediately looked away, his neck flushing red. Mother, I don't think... How old are you really? Mrs. Hodges' voice dropped to a dangerous quiet. And don't you dare lie to me again. The platform had gone silent. Clara could hear the wind moving through the prairie grass beyond the town, could hear her own pulse thundering in her ears. She had known this moment might come, had prepared for it even. But standing here with all these eyes on her, with the weight of her last hope pressing down on her shoulders, the truth felt like admitting defeat. 28, ma'am. Someone in the crowd gasped. Clara didn't look to see who. 28. Mrs. Hodges repeated the words like they tasted foul. You told us 23. You lied in your correspondence. You came here under false pretenses. I didn't lie about anything else. Clara's voice gained strength, though her hands shook. Everything else I told you was true. I can work harder than most women half my age. I don't complain. I don't need luxuries. I just need what you need. Mrs. Hodges cut her off, is to be honest. 28 years old. A woman's childbearing years are already half spent by that age. My son needs a wife who can give him sons plural. Strong sons to work this land after we're gone. Not a near spinster who will likely give him one sickly child before her womb dries up entirely. The words hit Clara like physical blows. She heard the murmurs spreading through the crowd, saw the way people's expressions changed from curious to pitying to something worse, contemptuous. As if she'd tried to trick them all. As if wanting a home, a family, a chance at a life was some kind of crime when you were a woman past 25. Mother, please. Thomas finally found his voice. Maybe we could just... No. Mrs. Hodges turned to her son. I didn't advertise for a mail-order bride and pay for her train ticket from Chicago so you could settle for damaged goods. This woman deceived us. The arrangement is void. I'm standing right here, Clara said quietly. I can hear you. Mrs. Hodges turned back to her, and something flickered in her expression, not quite guilt, but perhaps a shadow of it. I'm sure you can, and I'm sure you can also hear me when I tell you that there is no place for you at our ranch. Thomas will not be marrying you. We'll pay for your return ticket to Chicago, of course. We're not cruel people. No, Clara said, just honest ones. The irony in her voice made Mrs. Hodges' mouth tighten, but she didn't respond. Instead, she took her son's arm and turned away, moving through the parting crowd toward a wagon waiting at the edge of the platform. Wait. Thomas pulled free from his mother's grip and hurried back to Clara. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd even thought, 19, maybe 20 at most. His hands twisted his hat brim as he spoke in a low, rushed voice. I'm sorry. Your letters were so nice. You seemed like you'd be kind. But my mother, It's all right, Thomas. Clara forced herself to smile, though it felt like her face might crack. You should listen to your mother. She knows what's best. He looked like he wanted to say something else, but Mrs. Hodges' sharp voice cut across the platform. Thomas, now. He fled. Clara stood alone in the center of the platform, her carpet bag at her feet, the late afternoon sun casting her shadow long across the weathered boards. Around her, the crowd began to disperse, conversations starting up again, the scandal already being chewed over and absorbed into the town's collective memory. She would be a story they told the pathetic old maid who tried to trap young Thomas Hodges with lies. She didn't cry. She'd learned not to cry in public 2 years ago, standing beside her parents' grave, while the creditors inventoried everything her family had owned, taking it all to pay debts she hadn't even known existed. She'd learned that tears only made people uncomfortable, and uncomfortable people were rarely helpful. Instead, she picked up her bag and walked. The town of Red Willow wasn't much a main street of dust and wooden buildings, a general store, a saloon, a church with a steeple that leaned slightly to the left. She'd studied the drawings in Thomas's letters, had imagined walking these streets as someone's wife, someone's partner, someone with a place in the world again. Now she walked them as a stranger with nowhere to go and less than $5 in her pocket. The boarding house stood near the edge of town, a 2-story structure that had seen better days. The paint was peeling and the porch sagged in the middle, but there was a lamp burning in the window and a sign that read, "Rooms Available." Inside, the proprietress was a stout woman with flour on her hands and suspicion in her eyes. How long to... Just tonight. Clara counted out the coins carefully. How much? 50 cents. Breakfast included, but you'll eat what I'm cooking, no special requests. That's fine. The woman's expression softened slightly as she took in Clara's worn dress, the careful way she handled her money. You're the one came in on the train today. The mail order bride. It wasn't a question. Clara didn't bother to confirm or deny it. Town talks fast, the woman continued, leading her up a narrow staircase that creaked with every step. Mrs. Hodges has a tongue that wags faster than a dog's tail. She'll have told everyone by now that you're some kind of swindler. I didn't swindle anyone. Clara's voice came out harder than she intended. I just wanted a chance. The woman stopped at a door, pulled a key from her apron pocket. Well, you won't find much sympathy here. This is a hard land, and people don't have patience for foolishness. They'll see you as a woman who tried to trick a good family. Is that what you see? The woman looked at her for a long moment, then sighed. I see a woman who's had a bad day. Room's third on the left, chamber pots under the bed. Don't make noise after 9. The room was small, barely large enough for the narrow bed, a washstand, and a single chair by the window. But it was clean, and the sheets smelled like lye soap and sunshine. And when Clara finally closed the door and set her bag down, her legs nearly gave out from under her. She sat on the edge of the bed and stared at her hands. They were rough hands, calloused from work, the nails cut short and practical. 28-year-old hands. 2 old hands, apparently, for a fresh start. The mathematics of her situation were brutally simple. $5 minus 50 cents for the room left her with $4.50. The return ticket to Chicago would cost at least $3, probably more. That left her with maybe $1.50 to start over in a city where she had no family, no prospects, and no references since she'd burned every bridge to come west. Or she could stay here in a town that already thought she was a liar and a cheat and try to find work. Doing what? The boarding house already had a proprietress. The general store was run by a family. She could ask at the saloon, but she knew what kind of work they'd offer a woman alone, and she wasn't desperate enough for that. Not yet. The sun was setting, painting the sky outside her window in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if she'd had any beauty left in her to appreciate them. Instead, Clara unpinned her hair, washed her face in the basin of cold water on the washstand, and tried to make a plan. By morning, she would figure something out. She always did. She'd survived her parents' death, survived the loss of everything she'd known, survived the journey west on hope and half-truths. She could survive this. She had to. The knock on her door came just as full darkness fell. Clara froze her brush halfway through her hair. No one knew she was here except the proprietress, and she couldn't think of any good reason for a knock at this hour. "Miss Wynne," a man's voice, rough and low. "My name's Eli Thorne. I was at the station today. I'd like a word if you're willing." Clara's hand went to the door handle, then stopped. "It's late, Mr. Thorne. Perhaps in the morning. Won't take but a minute, and it's important." There was something in his voice that made her open the door. Not threat exactly, but a kind of blunt honesty that felt like solid ground after a day of shifting sand. The man standing in the hallway was tall, weathered in the way of men who worked under the sun. He was perhaps 40, with dark hair starting to gray at the temples, and eyes that looked like they'd seen their share of trouble. His clothes were clean but worn, and he held his hat in his hands with an awkwardness that suggested he wasn't used to calling on women in boarding houses. "I'll stand out here," he said, as if reading her hesitation. "You can keep the door cracked if it makes you comfortable. I just wanted to say my piece." "All right." Clara kept one hand on the door, ready to slam it if needed. "Say it." "I heard what happened at the station. Saw most of it, actually. I was there picking up horse medicine, and I couldn't help but overhear the whole mess. Then you know I'm not welcome in this town. If you're here to warn me to leave, I'm here to offer you a job." Clara blinked. Of all the things she'd expected, that wasn't one of them. Eli Thorne shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "I run a ranch about 5 miles outside town. Small operation horses, mostly some cattle. I lost my housekeeper 6 months back when she married and moved to Denver. Been managing on my own since then, but the place is falling apart. I need someone who can cook clean, maybe help with the books. You said you ran a boarding house." "My father's boarding house. I helped." "That's more experience than I've got. The job pays $20 a month plus room and board. You'd have your own quarters in the main house. Separate entrance lock on the door. I'm not looking for anything improper, Miss Wynne. Just honest work from an honest worker." Clara studied his face, looking for the catch. There was always a catch. "Why me? You don't know me. For all you know, Mrs. Hodges was right, and I'm a liar and a cheat." "Maybe." He met her eyes steadily. "But I saw your face when she said those things. I saw how you held yourself together when most women would have crumbled. That tells me you've got backbone. And I heard you tell Thomas it was all right that he should listen to his mother, even though she'd just humiliated you in front of the whole town. That tells me you've got grace. Or stupidity." A smile flickered across his face, brief as lightning. "Maybe that too. But I'll take a stupid, graceful woman with backbone over a clever, cruel one any day of the week." Clara's throat tightened. It was the first kind thing anyone had said to her in longer than she could remember. "I don't need an answer tonight," Eli continued. "Think on it. I'll be at the general store tomorrow morning around 8 getting supplies. If you want the job, meet me there. If you don't show, I'll understand and I'll wish you well wherever you end up." He settled his hat back on his head and turned to leave. "Mr. Thorne," he paused, looking back. "Why were you at the station? Really?" He was quiet for a moment, and something complicated crossed his face. "Because 5 years ago my wife stepped off a train at that same platform. She'd come west as a mail-order bride too, and the man who'd sent for her took one look and decided she wasn't pretty enough for his tastes, sent her back east on the next train. What happened to her? She met me in town before she left. I was younger then, more foolish. But I knew a good thing when I saw it, even if I didn't have the sense to hold on to it properly." His voice went rough. "She died 3 years ago. Fever took her, and I've regretted every day since that I didn't treat her better when I had the chance." Clara didn't know what to say to that. I saw you standing there today, Eli said quietly. And I saw her. Saw that same look in your eyes like you'd put all your hope in a basket and someone just kicked it into the dirt. I couldn't help her that day. She was too proud to accept help from a stranger, but maybe I can help you, if you'll let me. He left before she could respond, his boots heavy on the stairs, and then Clara was alone again with her thoughts and the dying light outside her window. She didn't sleep much that night. Lay awake running through her options, few as they were. $20 a month wasn't much, but it was more than she had now. Room and board meant she could save every penny, maybe build up enough to eventually start over somewhere else. Or maybe, and this thought crept in despite her best efforts to crush it, maybe she could build something here. The town might hate her now, but towns had short memories when you proved yourself useful. She could work hard, keep her head down, show them she wasn't what Mrs. Hodges had painted her to be. And Eli Thorne. He'd been honest with her. That counted for something. More than something. She rose before dawn, washed and dressed in her second-best dress, the practical brown one she'd worn for working in her father's boarding house. Pinned her hair up tight and severe. Packed her few belongings back into her carpet bag. The boarding house proprietress was in the kitchen when Clara came down kneading bread dough with the kind of violence that suggested she was working through some personal grievance. Leaving already? The woman didn't look up from her work. Yes, ma'am. Thank you for the room. Didn't use the breakfast you paid for. That's all right. Now the woman did look up, flour dusting her broad face. Eli Thorne came by last night. I saw him go up to your room. It wasn't quite an accusation, but it wasn't quite not one either. He offered me a job, Clara said evenly. I'm going to take it. The woman's hand stilled in the dough. Eli's a good man. Quiet keeps to himself mostly since his wife died. But he's fair, and he doesn't tolerate nonsense. You could do worse. That seems to be the story of my life lately. A short, sharp laugh burst from the woman. You've got spine, I'll give you that. You'll need it if you're going to make it out here. This land eats up soft people and spits out the bones. Then I suppose it's lucky I'm not soft. No. The woman studied her with something that might have been approval. No, I don't suppose you are. Take some of this bread when you go. Fresh baked this morning. Eli won't have had breakfast yet, and the man lives on coffee and jerky when left to his own devices. Clara accepted the warm loaf wrapped in cloth, surprised by the unexpected kindness. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just prove that old Harpy Hodges wrong about you. Nothing would give this town more satisfaction than seeing her have to eat her words. The general store was just opening when Clara arrived, the owner sweeping the front step and giving her a long measuring look as she passed. Inside, the smell of coffee and leather and tobacco wrapped around her familiar smells from her father's boarding house back when life made sense. Eli Thorne stood at the counter discussing grain prices with the shopkeeper. He looked up when the bell over the door chimed, and something in his expression eased when he saw her. Miss Wynne. He touched the brim of his hat. You came. I did. She set her carpetbag down and held out the wrapped bread. Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house sent this. She seems to think you don't eat properly. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Mrs. Patterson worries too much, but I won't turn down fresh bread. He took the loaf, then gestured to the supplies piled on the counter. I was just finishing up here. We can head out whenever you're ready. I'm ready. The shopkeeper, a thin man with wire spectacles, cleared his throat. That'll be $8.30, Eli. As Eli counted out the money, Clara felt the weight of the shopkeeper's stare. She'd felt it all morning, in fact. Felt it from every person she'd passed on the street. Felt their eyes following her, their whispers trailing behind her like smoke. The old mail-order bride, the liar, the one who tried to trap young Thomas Hodges. She lifted her chin and stared back until the shopkeeper looked away. Outside, a wagon waited loaded with sacks of grain and other supplies. Eli helped her up onto the bench seat with the kind of courteous distance that suggested he'd been thinking about propriety. It's about an hour's drive, he said, taking up the reins. Road's rough in places. If you need to stop, I'll be fine. He nodded and clicked to the horses, and they rolled out of Red Willow with the morning sun painting everything gold. The prairie stretched out endlessly on all sides, grass rippling in the wind like water. Claire had seen pictures of the West, had read descriptions in books and newspapers, but nothing had prepared her for the sheer enormity of the sky out here, the way it seemed to swallow everything beneath it. "It's something, isn't it?" Eli's voice was quiet. "First time I saw it, I thought I'd disappear into all this space, thought it might just eat me up." "What changed your mind?" "Realize the space isn't trying to eat you, it's just there, big enough to hold whatever you bring to it. Your hope, your grief, your mistakes. It doesn't judge, just holds it all and keeps on being big." Claire considered this. "Is that why you stayed?" "Partly. Also because I'm stubborn, and I didn't want to give this land the satisfaction of beating me." He glanced at her. "You strike me as the stubborn type, too. Is that a compliment or a warning?" "Both, maybe." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the wagon wheels creaking, the horses' hooves steady on the packed earth. In the distance, Claire could see mountains, their peaks still touched with snow despite the autumn warmth. "Your wife," she said carefully, "the one you mentioned, what was she like?" Eli was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Sarah was practical, smart. She saw problems and fixed them without making a fuss about it. When she came west, she didn't expect romance or adventure. She just wanted a decent life with someone who'd treat her fair, and He paused. "I gave her that mostly, but I was young and stupid, and I thought there should be more. Passion, I guess. The kind of love you read about in books. I didn't realize until after she was gone that what we had was better than that. It was real. I'm sorry." "Me too." He cleared his throat. "But I learned something from it. Learned that honesty matters more than pretty words. Hard work matters more than grand gestures. And someone who shows up day after day matters more than someone who makes you feel like you're burning up." Clara thought about Thomas Hodges and his mother, about the contract that had promised her a new life and delivered public humiliation instead. That's a hard lesson. Most good ones are. The ranch appeared gradually, first just a dark smudge on the horizon, then slowly resolving into buildings. A main house larger than she'd expected but clearly neglected. A barn with one door hanging crooked, several smaller outbuildings in various states of disrepair. And everywhere that endless grass, that impossible sky. "It's not much," Eli said, and she could hear the apology in his voice. "Sarah kept it nice, but since she's been gone, I've let things slide. I focus on the horses and the rest. Well, the rest needs someone who cares about it." "It's fine," Clara said, and meant it. The house had good bones, she could see that. It just needed attention. Needed someone to notice the peeling paint and the sagging porch rail and the windows that hadn't been properly cleaned in months. Needed someone like her. Eli helped her down from the wagon, then led her inside through the front door. The interior was dim and dusty furniture covered in sheets, cobwebs in the corners. But the floors were solid wood, and there was a big kitchen with a cast-iron stove, and the windows, once cleaned, would let in floods of light. "Your quarters are through here." He led her down a short hallway to a door at the back of the house. "Used to be Sarah's sewing room. After she died, I converted it. There's a bed, a dresser, a small stove for heat. And look." He opened the door, and Clara stepped into a space that was small but self-contained. A narrow bed with a quilt that looked handmade, a dresser with a mirror above it, a window that looked out over the prairie, and yes, a small pot-bellied stove in the corner with a neat stack of wood beside it. "The door locks from the inside," Eli said, demonstrating. "And I want you to know, Miss Wynne, that I meant what I said. This is a job, nothing more. You'll have your privacy and I'll have mine. We'll work together during the day, but your evenings are your own." Clara set her carpet bag on the bed, running her hand over the quilt. The stitching was fine, and even the pattern, a star. "Your wife made this." "Yes, she was good with her hands." He stood awkwardly in the doorway, clearly unsure of the protocol. "I'll let you settle in. Kitchen's down the hall if you get hungry. I've got to see to the horses' check on a mare who's been favoring her left foreleg. Take your time getting your bearings." He started to leave, then paused. "Miss Wynne, I'm glad you came. I think this might work out well, for both of us." "I hope so, Mr. Thorne." After he left, Clara sat on the edge of the bed and looked around her new home. It wasn't what she'd imagined when she'd boarded that train in Chicago. Wasn't the fresh start with a young husband and a family to build and a place in a community. But it was honest. It was real. And it was hers, at least for now. She unpacked her few belongings, hanging her dresses in the small wardrobe, setting her mother's silver brush on the dresser. Washed her face in the basin of cold water someone, Eli, she assumed had left for her. Then she rolled up her sleeves and went to survey her new workplace. The kitchen was a disaster. Not dirty exactly, but neglected. Dishes stacked haphazardly in the cupboards. The stove thick with old grease. The floor swept but not scrubbed. She opened the pantry and found supplies, flour, sugar, coffee beans, salt pork, but nothing fresh. Nothing that suggested actual cooking, rather than just fuel for survival. Clara tied on an apron she found hanging on a hook and got to work. By the time Eli came in for lunch, she had the stove scrubbed, the dishes reorganized, and a pot of bean soup simmering with the salt pork and some dried onions she'd found. It wasn't fancy, but it was hot and filling, and when she ladled it into bowls and set one in front of him with a chunk of Mrs. Patterson's bread, his expression was almost comical. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did." "That's why you hired me, isn't it? To cook and clean." "Well, yes, but I meant you could take today to settle in." "I'm settled." Clara sat across from him with her own bowl. "And I'd rather work than sit still. Sitting still makes me think too much." He studied her over his soup, then nodded slowly. "I understand that feeling." They ate in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than the one in the wagon, more comfortable. The silence of two people who'd both survived loss and knew that sometimes quiet was better than empty words. After lunch, Clara tackled the main room, pulling sheets off furniture, beating dust out of cushions, washing windows until the afternoon light streamed in clear and bright. She found Sarah's presence everywhere in the careful arrangement of books on a shelf, in the embroidered pillow covers, in the way the furniture was positioned to catch the best light. This had been a home once. Could be again, maybe with work. Evening came soft and golden. Eli was still out with the horses when Clara prepared a simple dinner of fried eggs and bread and the last of the soup. She set the table, lit a lamp against the gathering dusk, and was just wondering if she should ring the dinner bell she'd found by the back door when Eli appeared dusty and tired. "Smells good," he said, washing his hands at the pump outside the kitchen door. "It's not much. It's more than I've had in 6 months." They ate, and this time Eli talked a little about the horses, about the mare's leg improving, about his plans for next spring. Clara listened and asked occasional questions, learning the rhythm of this new life. After dinner, she washed the dishes while Eli reviewed some papers at the kitchen table. The domesticity of it all felt strange and familiar at once, like playing house, except it was real. It was her job. It was how she'd earn her keep in this world. When she finished, she dried her hands and turned to find Eli watching her. "I want to say thank you," he said, "for today, for taking a chance on this place. On me." "You took a chance on me first," Clara pointed out. "A bigger one, probably. For all you know, I'll rob you blind and run off in the night." "Will you?" "No." "Then I guess we're even." Clara smiled despite herself. "I guess we are. Good night, Mr. Thorne." "Good night, Miss Wynne." In her small room, Clara undressed and climbed into bed, the quilt soft around her. Through the window, she could see stars, more stars than she'd ever imagined existed, scattered across the sky like someone had spilled diamonds on black velvet. She thought about Mrs. Hodges and Thomas and the crowd on the platform. Thought about the whispers that would follow her in town. Thought about how her life had narrowed to this, a small room in a rancher's house, $20 a month, and no guarantee of anything beyond tomorrow. But she also thought about Eli's quiet kindness, about the way he'd looked at her across the dinner table, not with pity or judgment, but with something like recognition. Like he saw her not as a failed mail-order bride or a desperate woman, but as a person who'd had a hard road and was still walking it. Tomorrow, she would wake up and work, would scrub floors and cook meals, and slowly, carefully build something from the wreckage of her plans. It wasn't what she'd hoped for, but it was real, and it was hers, and for now that was enough. Outside, the wind moved through the grass with a sound like the ocean, and Clara Wynne fell asleep to its rhythm, dreaming of home, not the one she'd lost, but the one she might eventually build. The first week passed in a blur of work that left Clara's hands raw and her back aching but her mind blessedly quiet. She woke each morning before dawn to find a tin cup of warm milk waiting outside her door, still steaming in the cold air. The first time it happened, she'd stood there in her nightgown, staring at that simple cup like it was some kind of puzzle she needed to solve. By the third morning, she'd stopped questioning it and simply accepted this small kindness from a man who seemed more comfortable with gestures than words. The house slowly came back to life under her attention. She scrubbed floors until the wood gleamed, beat rugs, until no more dust came out, washed every window, until the glass was invisible, and the prairie seemed to reach right into the rooms. In the pantry, she found jars of preserves that Sarah had put up years ago, the seals still good, the fruit still bright. She couldn't bring herself to open them, though. They felt like sacred things, the last physical remnants of a woman's care for her home. Instead, she made a list of supplies they'd need and presented it to Eli over breakfast on the fourth day. "We're low on flour and completely out of fresh vegetables," she said, buttering a piece of toast. "The chickens you've got are old, they're barely laying. We need younger hens if you want eggs regularly. And the root cellar needs restocking before winter comes in earnest." Eli looked up from his coffee, something like amusement in his eyes. "You've been taking inventory." "It's what I do, what I did anyway back at the boarding house. My father always said you can't run a kitchen if you don't know what you have and what you need." "Your father sounds like he was a practical man." "He was." Claire's throat tightened the way it always did when she thought about her parents. "He used to say that sentiment was fine for poetry, but facts paid the bills." "Must be where you get it from." "Get what?" "That practical streak. The way you look at a problem and just fix it. No drama, no fuss." Clara wasn't sure if that was a compliment or not, so she just said, "I'll need to go into town for supplies, unless you'd rather make the trip yourself." Eli's expression shifted, became more serious. "You sure you want to do that? It's only been a few days. People talk. People always talk. I learned that when my parents died and the whole neighborhood suddenly had opinions about how a young unmarried woman should conduct herself." She met his eyes steadily. "I'm not going to hide out here like I've done something wrong. I haven't." "No," he said quietly. "You haven't. So I'll go to town. Make the supply run. Show them I'm still standing." He nodded slowly. "All right, but I'm going with you." "You don't need to." "I know I don't need to. I want to." His jaw set in a way that suggested argument would be pointless. "We'll go tomorrow morning. Early before the town gets busy. In and out, quick and efficient." But nothing in Red Willow turned out to be quick or efficient. They arrived just after 8, the wagon rattling down the main street as shopkeepers opened their doors and swept their stoops. Clara felt the eyes on her immediately, the same stares from that first day, but now mixed with something else. Curiosity, maybe? Or speculation about what exactly she was doing living out at Eli Thorne's ranch. Let them speculate, she thought, climbing down from the wagon with her head high and her list clutched in her hand. The general store was busy, several women already inside examining fabric and trading gossip. The conversation died the moment Clara walked in. "Morning, Miss Wynne?" The shopkeeper, Mr. Brennan, she'd learned his name, was greeted her with professional courtesy, though his eyes slid away from hers. "What can I help you with today?" Clara handed him her list. "These items, please, and I'll need them packaged for transport." He scanned the list, his eyebrows rising slightly. "This is a substantial order. Will Mr. Thorne be settling the account?" "I will," Eli said from behind her, and Clara felt an unexpected warmth at the quiet support in his voice. While Mr. Brennan gathered supplies, the other women in the store made no pretense of not watching. Clara recognized one of them, a young woman who'd been on the platform that first day, had gasped when Mrs. Hodges revealed Clara's real age. "You're still here, then?" the woman said, not quite friendly, but not overtly hostile either. "We'd heard you took a position with Mr. Thorne." "I did." "As what exactly?" This came from an older woman with steel gray hair and eyes to match. "Housekeeper, or something else?" The implication hung in the air like smoke. Clara felt Eli tense beside her, but she laid a hand on his arm, light warning. "Housekeeper," she said clearly. "Mr. Thorne's wife passed away several years ago and the house needed attention. I needed work. It's a practical arrangement that benefits us both." Practical. The gray-haired woman repeated her tone, suggesting she had other words in mind. Yes, I'm sure that's one way to describe it. Mrs. Fletcher. Eli's voice was quiet, but carried an edge Clara hadn't heard before. Miss Wynne is a respectable employee doing respectable work. If you've got other ideas, I suggest you keep them to yourself. The woman's face flushed, but before she could respond, a new voice cut across the store. Well, well, the little liar shows her face in town. Clara turned to see Mrs. Hodges standing in the doorway, Thomas hovering uncertainly behind her. The older woman swept into the store like she owned it, her black dress rustling. I'm surprised you had the nerve, Mrs. Hodges continued, examining a spool of thread with exaggerated interest. After the stunt you tried to pull with my son. Mother, Thomas said weakly. Please, there's no need. Hush, Thomas. This woman needs to understand that we don't tolerate deception in Red Willow. We're good, honest people here. Something inside Clara snapped. She'd been patient, had held her tongue, had tried to take the high road. But standing there in that store with everyone staring with Mrs. Hodges' smug satisfaction filling the air, she found she was done being quiet. You're absolutely right, Clara said, her voice calm and clear. Deception should not be tolerated. So let's talk about honesty, shall we, Mrs. Hodges? The older woman's head snapped up, eyes narrowing. I beg your pardon. You advertised for a bride for your son, young, healthy, capable of bearing children. But what you didn't mention in that advertisement was that you were really looking for a broodmare, someone young enough and scared enough and desperate enough to accept being treated like livestock instead of a person. A collective gasp went through the store. Mrs. Hodges' face turned an alarming shade of purple. How dare you? I dare because it's true. Clara took a step forward, and she felt powerful in her anger, righteous in her truth. I lied about my age by 5 years. 5 years, Mrs. Hodges. You lied about the entire nature of the arrangement. You wanted a womb with legs, not a wife for your son. And when I didn't meet your specifications, you humiliated me in front of the entire town, rather than having a private conversation like a decent human being. My son deserves better than a used-up old maid who... Your son deserves a mother who doesn't speak for him like he's still in short pants. Claire's voice cut like a blade. Thomas, are you truly happy with this? With her choosing your whole life for you because you're a grown man, or at least you're supposed to be, and it's past time you started acting like one? Thomas's face had gone white, his eyes darting between Clara and his mother. For a moment, Clara thought he might actually find his spine might actually speak up. But then he looked down at his boots and said nothing. That's what I thought. Clara turned back to Mrs. Hodges. You want to call me a liar? Fine. I lied about my age because I was desperate and scared and alone, and I thought maybe bending the truth by a few years would give me a chance at a life. But you lie every day about who you are and what you want, and you do it without shame because you've convinced yourself that your cruelty is somehow righteous. So yes, Mrs. Hodges, let's talk about honesty. Let's talk about who the real liar is in this room. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Mr. Brennan had stopped moving a sack of flour frozen in his hands. Mrs. Hodges' mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Then she drew herself up to her full height, trembling with rage. You will regret this, she said, her voice shaking. I have influence in this town. I can make your life very difficult. You already made my life difficult, Clara said quietly. You did that the moment you decided I was less than human because I wasn't the exact product you ordered. But here's the thing. Mrs. Hodges, I survived losing everything I ever had. I survived being alone and scared in a city that didn't care if I lived or died. I survived a 2-day train journey to a place where I knew no one hoping for a chance at something better. Your influence doesn't scare me. Nothing you can do to me is worse than what life has already done. She turned to Mr. Brennan. Is my order ready? He blinked, then seemed to remember himself. Yes, ma'am. I'll get it loaded on your wagon. Thank you. Clara walked out of the store with her spine straight and her head high, Eli following close behind. She could feel every eye on her back, could practically hear the gossip already forming, but she didn't care. She'd said what needed saying, and she wasn't going to apologize for it. Outside, Eli helped load the supplies onto the wagon in silence. It wasn't until they were pulling out of town that he finally spoke. "That was something," he said. Clara's hands shook where they gripped her skirt. Now that the adrenaline was fading, the reality of what she'd done was settling in. "I shouldn't have lost my temper. Why not?" "She had it coming. She's influential. You heard her, she can make trouble." "Let her try." Eli's voice was firm. "You were right about everything you said. I've known that woman for 10 years and she's always been a bully hiding behind respectability. Someone needed to call her on it. But now the whole town will think you've got backbone. Some of them will respect that. The ones who don't aren't worth worrying about." Clara wanted to believe him, but she'd seen the faces in that store. Seen the shock, the disapproval, the way some of them had looked at her like she'd committed some unforgivable sin. A woman wasn't supposed to speak that way, especially not to someone like Mrs. Hodges. "I may have just made your life harder," she said quietly. "If people associate you with me after that scene, Clara." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and it made her look at him in surprise. His eyes were steady on the road ahead, but there was something gentle in his expression. "I chose to offer you that job. I chose to bring you to my home. I chose to stand beside you in that store. Those were my choices, and I don't regret a single one. If the town has a problem with it, that's their problem, not ours." The word "ours" made something in Clara's chest tighten. She looked away, blinking against the sudden sting of tears. When was the last time she'd been part of an "ours"? When was the last time someone had stood beside her, not because they had to, but because they wanted to? They rode the rest of the way in silence, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that didn't need filling. Back at the ranch, Eli helped her unload supplies, then disappeared to check on the horses, while Clara put everything away. She worked mechanically, her mind still turning over the confrontation with Mrs. Hodges, wondering what the consequences would be. She didn't have to wait long to find out. 3 days later, the whisper started reaching even their isolated ranch. A farmer who sold Eli hay mentioned carefully awkwardly that people in town were talking. About Clara's outburst. About her living alone with Eli. About what that might mean. "They're saying she's his mistress," the farmer said, not quite meeting Eli's eyes. "That she's taken advantage of him in his grief, wormed her way into his home and his bed." Clara, who'd been bringing water to the men, froze in place. The bucket handle bit into her palm. Eli's face went dark. "Who's saying this?" "Well, I can't rightly say who started it, but Mrs. Hodges has been talking to anyone who'll listen. Says it's indecent you having a young woman living in your house without any proper chaperone, or—" "I'm 28 years old," Clara said, her voice sharp. "Hardly young, and hardly in any danger of corrupting anyone." The farmer's face flushed. "I'm not saying I believe it, ma'am. I'm just passing along what's being said." "Why?" Clara set the bucket down with a thud. "Why does anyone care what I do, or where I live, or how I earn my living? What business is it of theirs?" "Well, it's just, people talk, especially when things don't look proper." "Proper?" Clara laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want to know what's not proper?" "A woman being left destitute when her parents die because society says she can't inherit her father's business. A woman having to sell herself like cattle to a stranger just to have a roof over her head. A woman being judged and condemned and gossiped about because she dares to work for an honest living instead of starving quietly in some corner where no one has to look at her. That's what's not proper." The farmer shifted uncomfortably. "I understand you're upset, ma'am, but do you—" Clara's voice rose. "Do you really understand what it's like to have people you've never met who know nothing about your life or your struggles sit in judgment of you, to have your character assassinated by people who wouldn't lift a finger to help you if you were dying in the street?" "Clara." Eli's hand landed gently on her shoulder. "That's enough." She whirled on him. "Don't tell me that's enough. Don't tell me to calm down or be reasonable or any of those things. Men tell women when we finally get angry about the way we're treated. I'm tired, Eli. I'm tired of being polite and quiet and grateful for scraps while people like Mrs. Hodges get to say whatever they want without consequences. I know." His voice was maddeningly calm. "I know you're tired, but yelling at Bill here won't change anything. He's just the messenger." The farmer Bill nodded eagerly. "That's right, I'm just—" "Get off my land," Eli said, still in that same calm voice. Bill blinked. What? You heard me. Take your gossip and your warnings and get off my property. And you can tell everyone in town who's so interested in my household arrangements that they can mind their own damn business. Now, Eli, I was just trying to help. Were you, or were you trying to see how we'd react? See if there was any truth to the rumors so you'd have something juicy to report back? Eli's voice hardened. I've known you 15 years, Bill, and I've always thought you were a decent man. But decent men don't spread poison just because it tastes sweet on their tongues. The farmer's face went red then white. He set down the payment Eli had given him for the hay and backed toward his wagon. I see how it is. I was trying to warn you, but if that's how you want to be, that's how I want to be. And Bill, don't come back. They watched him drive away, dust rising behind his wagon. When he was out of sight, Clara sank down onto the porch steps, suddenly exhausted. I'm sorry, she said. I cost you a hay supplier. Bill's hay was full of thistle anyway. I can do better. Eli sat beside her, his shoulder not quite touching hers. But you can't go on like this, Clara. You can't fight the whole town every time someone says something ignorant. Why not? Because you'll wear yourself out, and because... He paused, choosing his words carefully. Because some fights aren't worth fighting. Some people aren't worth the energy it takes to be angry at them. So I should just let them say whatever they want. Let them call me a liar and a whore and whatever else they've decided I am. No, you should live your life in a way that makes those accusations obviously false. You should work hard and hold your head high and trust that eventually the truth becomes clear. Clara laughed bitterly. That's a nice thought, very noble. But in my experience, the truth doesn't matter nearly as much as what people want to believe. Maybe not at first, but over time, over years. He looked out at the prairie, at the grass moving in the wind. I've been here a long time, Clara. I've seen reputations rise and fall. I've seen the town darling turn out to be a thief and the suspected criminal turn out to be a saint. People remember what you do more than what they say about you. So do the work. Be honest. Treat people fair. And eventually the gossip dies down because it's boring compared to reality. And in the meantime you endure, because that's what strong people do. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she shouldn't have to endure unjust treatment, that the world should be fair and people should mind their own business. But she was 28 years old, old enough to know that should had very little to do with how life actually worked. Your wife must have loved you very much, she said quietly. Eli looked surprised. What makes you say that? Because she stayed. Because she put up with all this, the isolation, the gossip, the way small towns eat people alive. She could have gone back east where life was easier, but she stayed. She stayed because she was stubborn, like you. He stood brushing dust from his pants. Come on, those chickens won't feed themselves, and feeling sorry for ourselves won't get the work done. But as Clara stood to follow him, she felt something shift inside her. A kind of settling like rocks finding their place in a stream bed. She was here. She had work and a roof, and a man who stood beside her even when it would have been easier not to. That was more than she'd had a week ago. More than she'd had in the 2 years since her parents died. Maybe Eli was right. Maybe the way forward wasn't through fighting, but through enduring. Through showing up every day and doing the work and letting her actions speak louder than the town's words. It wasn't the ending she'd imagined when she'd boarded that train from Chicago. But then nothing about her life had gone according to plan. She might as well get used to it. The days settled into a rhythm after that. Clara rose before dawn, found her cup of warm milk dressed, and started the day's work. She cooked 3 meals, cleaned, mended, managed the household accounts that Eli had gratefully handed over. In the afternoons, when the house was in order, she sometimes helped with the horses, learning to curry them, to check their hooves, to read their moods. Eli was a patient teacher, his hands steady as he showed her how to approach a skittish mare, how to gentle a nervous colt. And slowly, she began to understand why he loved this work. There was something honest about horses. They didn't lie or gossip or judge. They just were in the simple, straightforward way that humans could never manage. 2 weeks after the confrontation with Bill, Clara made her second trip to town. Alone this time, despite Eli's offer to accompany her. She needed to prove to herself more than anyone that she could walk those streets without armor. The stairs were still there, but fewer now. The whispers still followed her, but quieter. And when she entered the general store, Mr. Brennan greeted her with what might have been the ghost of respect. "Miss Wynne, how can I help you today?" She handed him her list. As he gathered items, a voice spoke from behind her. "Miss Wynne." Clara turned to find a young woman barely 20 with auburn hair and nervous hands. She recognized her vaguely from the platform from that first terrible day. "My name's Margaret Porter," the woman said, her words coming in a rush. "I just wanted to say, what you said to Mrs. Hodges about women being treated like livestock. I've been thinking about it ever since, and I think you were right." Clara blinked, surprised. "Thank you. I'm supposed to marry Edgar Mitchell come spring," Margaret continued, lowering her voice. "And I don't love him, not even a little. But my father says it's a good match, says Edgar will take care of me. And she took a shaky breath. "I just keep thinking about what you said, about being a person instead of property, and I'm wondering if maybe I should speak up. Tell my father I want to wait, want to be sure." Margaret. An older woman, her mother, clearly appeared at her elbow, her expression disapproving. "We need to go, now." "Yes, Mama." But Margaret looked back at Clara as her mother pulled her away. "Thank you," she mouthed. Clara stood frozen in the middle of the store, something warm and unexpected blooming in her chest. She hadn't helped Margaret, hadn't given her advice or solutions. She'd just spoken her truth, and somehow that had been enough to plant a seed in someone else's mind. Maybe Eli was right. Maybe showing up and being honest and doing the work was enough. Maybe that was how you change things, not with grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but with small moments of truth that accumulated like snowflakes until they became something solid. The thought carried her through the rest of her errands, through the drive back to the ranch, through the evening chores. And that night when she sat down to dinner across from Eli, she found herself smiling for the first time in weeks. "Good day?" he asked. "Strange day, but yes, I think it was good. Tell me." So she did describing Margaret's words, the unexpected gratitude. Eli listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he nodded slowly. "That's how it starts," he said. "One person at a time. One moment at a time." "What starts?" "Change, respect, whatever you want to call it." He refilled her water glass. "You stood up for yourself, and now someone else is thinking maybe they can stand up for themselves too. That's worth a dozen confrontations with Mrs. Hodges." Clara thought about that as she washed dishes, as she checked the stove and damped it for the night, as she retreated to her small room. Through her window, she could see the barn, could see the light from Eli's lantern as he made his final rounds with the horses. She thought about Sarah, who'd lived in this house and slept under these same stars, and somehow found a way to be happy in this hard, lonely place. Who'd made quilts and put up preserves and stood beside a man who was learning too late to appreciate what he had. Clara pulled Sarah's quilt up around her shoulders and made a silent promise to the woman she'd never met. "I'll take care of him. I'll take care of this place. And I'll try to be worthy of the chance you never got to finish." Outside, the wind moved through the grass, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the moon. Clara closed her eyes and let sleep take her, dreaming of warm milk and steady hands, and a future that for the first time in 2 years felt like something she might actually want to reach for. October bled into November, and with it came the first real cold. Clara woke one morning to find frost etching patterns on her window, delicate as lace and twice as fragile. The warm milk was there as always, but now steam rose from it in visible curls, and she wrapped her hands around the tin cup, grateful for the heat as much as the gesture. She'd stopped questioning the milk, stopped overthinking what it meant that Eli rose even earlier than she did, just to leave this small kindness at her door. Some things she was learning didn't need to be examined or explained. They just needed to be accepted. The ranch changed with the weather. The horses grew thicker coats, their breath visible in the morning air. Eli spent longer hours reinforcing the barn against winter storms, checking and rechecking supplies. Clara helped where she could, learning to stack hay properly, to secure shutters, to read the sky for signs of coming snow. "We'll get our first real storm within the week," Eli said one afternoon, studying the clouds building on the horizon. "Can you feel it? The way the air gets heavy?" Clara closed her eyes and tried to sense what he meant. There was something different about the atmosphere, a pressure that made her ears feel strange. "I think so." When it comes, we might be stuck here for days. Can't get to town, can't get supplies. We'll have to make do with what we've got." He looked at her seriously. "You ever been through a real blizzard?" "In Chicago, yes, but I imagine it's different out here." "It is. No buildings to break the wind, no neighbors close enough to help if something goes wrong. It's just us and the storm doesn't care if we live or die." The words should have frightened her, but instead Clara felt something almost like excitement. A test then, a chance to prove she could handle whatever this land threw at her. "Then we'd better be ready," she said. They spent the next 2 days in frantic preparation. Clara baked enough bread to last a week, cooked huge pots of stew and beans that could be reheated quickly. She checked and double-checked the root cellar, taking inventory of every potato, every jar of preserves, every sack of flour. Eli brought in extra firewood, stacking it inside the mudroom until there was barely space to walk. He moved the horses to the near pasture close to the barn and reinforced every fence post that showed even the slightest weakness. The storm hit on a Tuesday night, arriving with a howl that woke Clara from a dead sleep. She lay in the darkness, listening to the wind tear at the house, feeling the whole structure shudder around her. Through her window, she could see nothing but white snow horizontal in the wind the world erased. She dressed quickly and made her way to the kitchen, where she found Eli already stoking the fire in the big cast-iron stove. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked without turning around. "The noise is incredible. Does it always sound like the world is ending?" "Pretty much." He straightened, wiping soot from his hands. "But the house is solid. Sarah and I weathered worse than this." There it was again. Sarah's name dropped into conversation like a stone into still water. Clara had noticed that Eli mentioned his wife more often now, not with the sharp grief of fresh loss, but with something gentler, remembrance instead of mourning. "Tell me about her," Clara said, surprising herself. "About Sarah. You've mentioned her, but I don't really know who she was." Eli poured coffee from the pot he'd already made, handed her a cup. "What do you want to know?" "Anything. Everything. She lived in this house, slept in your bed, made the quilt I use every night. I feel like I'm living in her shadow, but I don't even know what shape that shadow is." He was quiet for a long moment, and Clara worried she'd overstepped. But then he sat at the table, cradling his cup, and began to speak. "Sarah was practical. I think I told you that already. But she was also funny, dry humor, the kind that caught you off guard. She'd say something perfectly deadpan, and you'd have to think about it for a second before you realized she was joking." He smiled at the memory. "She came west because she wanted adventure, wanted to see something bigger than the little Pennsylvania town where she grew up. But when she got here and realized how hard it was, how lonely, she didn't complain, just rolled up her sleeves and got to work." "Like the quilt," Clara said softly. "Like the quilt. Like the preserves in the cellar. Like the way she organized the pantry. You probably noticed, everything has a place, everything labeled just so. That was Sarah. She believed if you were going to do something, you should do it right." "She sounds wonderful." "She was, but I was too young and too stupid to appreciate it properly." His voice went rough. "I kept thinking there should be more passion, more excitement. I'd see couples in town who couldn't keep their hands off each other, who looked at each other like they were the only people in the world, and I'd wonder why Sarah and I weren't like that. And now I understand that what we had was better. We were partners. We trusted each other. We worked together toward the same goals. That's rarer than passion, and it lasts longer." He looked at Clara across the table. "I think you would have liked her, and I think she would have liked you." The words settled over Clara like a benediction. She hadn't realized until that moment how much she needed to know that Sarah wouldn't have resented her presence here, wouldn't have seen her as an interloper. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, they sat in comfortable silence, drinking coffee and listening to the wind try to tear the world apart. The blizzard lasted 3 days. 3 days of being trapped inside while snow piled against the walls and the temperature plummeted. Clara had never been so aware of another person's presence. The sound of Eli's boots on the floor, the way he cleared his throat before speaking the particular rhythm of his breathing when he sat reading by the fire. They fell into an easy routine. Clara cooked. Eli kept the fires going and made regular trips to the barn to check on the horses. In the evenings, they sat in the main room, Clara mending clothes while Eli worked on his account books, or read from the small collection of books Sarah had kept. On the second night, he read aloud a novel about adventure on the high seas. Clara listened while her needle flew through fabric, and something about the domesticity of it all made her chest ache. This could be a life, she thought. This quiet companionship, this shared space, this feeling of safety in the midst of a storm. "You've got a good reading voice," she said when he paused to turn a page. He looked up, surprised. "Sarah used to say that too, said I should have been a teacher or a preacher instead of a rancher. Why didn't you?" "Didn't seem practical. This land was available cheap after the previous owner died. I knew horses, seemed like a sign." He closed the book, marking his place with a finger. "Do you ever regret it? Coming west?" Clara considered the question seriously. "I regret how it happened. I regret lying about my age, even if I understand why I did it. I regret the humiliation at the station. But coming west itself," she shook her head. "No. If I'd stayed in Chicago, I'd have ended up in a factory or as someone's underpaid maid working myself to death for pennies. At least here I'm building something." "Are you—" His eyes searched her face. "Or are you just surviving? Isn't that the same thing?" "No, surviving is keeping your head above water. Building is swimming toward shore." The distinction felt important, though Clara wasn't sure she understood it yet. "Then I suppose I'm trying to figure out where the shore is." "Let me know when you find it," Eli said quietly. "I've been looking for it myself." On the third day, the storm finally broke. Clara woke to silence so profound it was almost frightening after days of constant wind. She rushed to the window and found a world transformed, everything buried under snow that sparkled in the weak sunlight like crushed diamonds. Eli was already outside, a dark figure against all that white, digging a path to the barn. Clara dressed quickly and joined him, grabbing a spare shovel from the mudroom. "You don't have to," he started. "I know, but I want to." She began shoveling, her muscles protesting the unfamiliar work. Besides, two people work faster than one. They worked in tandem, clearing paths to the barn, to the chicken coop, to the woodshed. The cold bit at Clara's face made her fingers ache even through her gloves. But there was something satisfying about the physical labor, about seeing the path emerge from the snow. In the barn, they found the horses restless but unharmed. Eli moved among them with quiet efficiency, checking each one, speaking to them in a low voice that seemed to calm their nerves. Clara watched him work, struck by his gentleness with the animals, the way his whole demeanor softened around them. "The mare," she said suddenly. "The one who was favoring her leg when I first arrived. How is she?" "Dancer." "She's better. See for yourself." He led Clara to a stall where a beautiful gray mare stood, her eyes bright and curious. Turned out to be an abscess in her hoof. Once we got it drained and treated, she healed up fine. Clara reached out tentatively, and the mare snuffled at her hand, warm breath on her frozen fingers. "She's beautiful." "She is, and she knows it too, vain as anything." But his voice was fond. Sarah loved this horse. Used to ride her every morning before breakfast, rain or shine. "You must miss that, seeing her ride." "I miss a lot of things." He moved to the next stall, began measuring out feed. "But missing doesn't bring anything back, just makes you useless to the life you've still got to live." Clara wanted to argue that grief had its place, that missing things was natural and necessary. But she thought about her own losses, her parents, her home, the future she'd imagined, and realized Eli was right. She could spend her life mourning what she'd lost, or she could focus on what she still had. The choice was hers. A week after the storm, Clara made another trip to town. The roads were barely passable, the wagons struggling through snowdrifts, but they needed supplies, and she refused to be imprisoned by weather or gossip. Red Willow looked different under snow, smaller somehow, and more vulnerable. Smoke rose from chimneys and thin streams, and the few people on the street moved quickly, hunched against the cold. In the general store, Clara found Mr. Brennan looking harried and exhausted. "Storm hit us hard," he explained, gathering her order with less efficiency than usual. "The Peterson barn collapsed under the snow weight. The widow Hanson's chimney caught fire. And the Mitchells—" He paused, glancing at Clara. "Well, I suppose you'll hear about it anyway. Edgar Mitchell's engagement got broken off." Clara's heart jumped. "Margaret Porter." "The same. Caused quite a scandal. The girl stood up in church last Sunday and announced she wouldn't marry a man she didn't love no matter what her father said. Her father nearly had an apoplexy right there in the pews. Good for her, Clara said quietly. Mr. Brennan gave her a long look. Folks are saying you put ideas in her head, that conversation you had in here a few weeks back. I didn't tell her to do anything. I just spoke my truth. Well, your truth seems to be contagious. He said it without judgment, just stating fact. Mrs. Hodges is beside herself. Says you're corrupting the young women of Red Willow, teaching them to be rebellious and disrespectful. Clara laughed sharp and sudden. Mrs. Hodges would think a woman having her own thoughts was rebellious. Perhaps, but you should know there's talk of having you banned from the church social next month. Some of the ladies think your presence would be inappropriate. The words stung more than Clara wanted to admit. She'd been raised in the church, had always found comfort in community worship, even when everything else fell apart. To be excluded from that felt like one rejection too many. Let them ban me, she said, lifting her chin. I'll survive without their approval. But as she left the store, arms full of packages, she felt the weight of it settling on her shoulders. How many times could she be rejected before it broke something essential inside her? How many battles could she fight before she ran out of strength? She was loading supplies into the wagon when she heard her name called. Turning, she found Margaret Porter hurrying toward her, her face flushed with cold and excitement. Miss Wynne, I'm so glad I caught you. I wanted to thank you. For what? I didn't do anything. You did. You showed me it was possible to stand up for myself, to say no. Margaret's eyes shone. I know everyone's talking. I know my father's furious and the whole town thinks I'm scandalous. But Miss Wynne, I feel free. For the first time in my life, I feel like I can breathe. Claire's throat tightened. What will you do now? I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out. Just like you did. Margaret squeezed Clara's hand. You're braver than you know. Don't let them make you forget that. She hurried away before Clara could respond, leaving her standing in the snow with tears freezing on her cheeks. She hadn't cried in weeks, hadn't let herself, but something about Margaret's words cracked the dam she'd built around her emotions. She wasn't brave. She was just doing what she had to do to survive. But maybe she thought as she climbed into the wagon, maybe there was no difference between the two. Maybe survival itself was a kind of courage. The ride back to the ranch was long and cold, but Clara barely noticed. Her mind turned over the events of the morning, the revelation that her words had mattered to someone had changed something. When she arrived home, she found Eli in the barn cleaning tack. He looked up at her entrance, and whatever he saw on her face made him set down the bridle he was working on. What happened? She told him everything about Margaret, about the church social, about Mr. Brennan's warnings. Eli listened without interrupting, his expression darkening. They want to ban you from the social, he repeated when she finished. Because you had the audacity to help a young woman find her spine. Apparently. Well then, he stood brushing hay from his pants. I suppose I won't be attending either. Eli, you don't have to. Yes, I do. You think I'm going to sit in that church hall eating pie while they exclude you like you're some kind of pariah, while they punish you for doing nothing but speaking honestly. His jaw set in that stubborn way she'd come to recognize. I'd rather stay home. People will talk even more if you skip the social for my sake. Let them. I'm tired of caring what people think. He picked up his coat from where it hung on a nail. Come on, I want to show you something. Curious Clara followed him out of the barn and across the snowy yard to a section of fence that bordered the eastern pasture. The landscape stretched out before them, white and pristine and breathtakingly beautiful. When Sarah died, Eli said quietly, I thought about leaving. Selling this place, moving somewhere else where I wouldn't see her in every corner of the house. But then I came out here one morning right after a snowfall, just like this one, and I looked at all this space. And I realized that leaving wouldn't change anything. I'd still be carrying her loss with me. The only difference would be that I'd be carrying it somewhere unfamiliar instead of somewhere that held good memories along with the painful ones. Clara waited, sensing he had more to say. What I'm trying to tell you is that running from gossip won't make it stop. It'll just follow you to the next town, the next opportunity. At some point, you have to decide to stop running and start building. And this, he gestured at the ranch, the house, the endless prairie. This is where I decided to build. The question is this where you want to build too? The question hung in the cold air between them. Clara thought about Chicago, about the train west, about the humiliation at the station, and the slow, painful process of finding her footing here. She thought about warm milk and Sarah's quilt, and the way Eli had stood beside her in the general store. She thought about Margaret's gratitude and the satisfaction of seeing the house come back to life under her care. "I don't know if I have a choice," she said finally. "I don't have the money to leave. Don't have anywhere to go if I did." "That's not what I asked. I asked if you want to build here. One implies choice, Clara. One implies that even if you could go somewhere else, you'd choose to stay." Did she want to stay? The question terrified her because she didn't know the answer, or rather, she knew the answer but was afraid to admit it, afraid of what it might mean. "I think," she said slowly, "I think I'm starting to." "Want to stay? I mean, this place feels like it could be home if I let it." "Then let it." He turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "Stop holding back, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Stop protecting yourself against the possibility of more loss. Just be here, fully here, and see what happens. What if what happens is more pain, more rejection? Then you'll survive it, same as you survived everything else. But Clara, what if what happens is good? What if you let yourself be happy here and it actually works out?" The possibility seemed almost too fragile to consider. Happiness had been such a foreign concept for so long that Clara had forgotten it was something people actually achieved, not just dreamed about. "I'll try," she whispered. "That's all anyone can do." They stood together in the snow, watching the sun sink toward the horizon and paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. And for the first time since stepping off that train in Red Willow, Clara let herself imagine a future that didn't involve leaving. Let herself see years stretching out ahead of her in this place with this quiet man beside her and this big sky overhead. It should have frightened her. Instead, it felt like the first full breath she'd taken in years. That night, Clara sat in her room with pen and paper trying to write a letter to an old friend from Chicago. But the words wouldn't come. How could she explain what her life had become? How could she describe this strange provisional happiness she'd found in a place that had initially rejected her? She set down the pen and picked up the photograph she kept on her dresser, the only one she had of her parents taken shortly before they died. Her father stood tall and serious, her mother's hand on his arm. Both of them looking at the camera with the gravity people assumed for photographs. "I think you'd like him," she said to the photograph to the memory of her father. "Eli, I mean, he's honest like you were. Practical. He doesn't make promises he can't keep." The photograph, of course, didn't answer, but Clara felt better for having said it out loud. A soft knock on her door made her jump. "Clara, you still awake?" She opened the door to find Eli standing there with a bundle of fabric in his arms. "I was going through Sarah's things," he said awkwardly. "Thought maybe you could use this. It gets cold in here at night, and this is warmer than the quilt you've got." He handed her the bundle, and Clara unfolded it to reveal a heavy wool blanket beautifully made with a pattern of interlocking squares. "Eli, I can't take this. This was Sarah's. Sarah would want it used, not sitting in a trunk gathering dust. And you need it more than I do." He shifted his weight. "Besides, I think she'd like knowing someone was taking care of this place the way she did. Taking care of me the way she did." The honesty in his voice made Clara's eyes sting. "Thank you. For this, and for everything else. For standing up for me. For giving me a chance when no one else would. You've earned it 10 times over. This ranch runs better now than it has since Sarah died. You've brought life back to a place that was just existing." He paused. "I hope you know how much I appreciate that." After he left, Clara wrapped herself in Sarah's blanket and felt for the first time like maybe she had a right to be here. Like maybe this wasn't just a temporary stopping place, but somewhere she could actually belong. Through her window, she could see lights in the barn where Eli was doing a final check on the horses. She watched his silhouette move from stall to stall, steady and reliable as the sunrise. And she thought I could love him. The realization should have shocked her, but instead it felt inevitable. Of course she could love a man who left warm milk at her door. Of course she could love a man who stood beside her when the world condemned her. Of course she could love a man who was learning slowly to let go of his grief and reach for something new. But wanting something and having it were two different things. And Clara had learned the hard way not to reach for things that might be pulled away. So she wrapped the blanket tighter and made herself a promise she would stay. She would work. She would build this life one day at a time. And if somewhere along the way Eli's feelings shifted to match her own, then maybe, just maybe, she'd let herself hope for something more. But for now, survival and happiness were enough. More than enough. They were everything. December arrived with a bitterness that made November seem mild by comparison. The cold settled into Clara's bones, made every morning a battle between the warmth of her blankets and the necessity of starting the day. But still the warm milk appeared at her door without fail, and still she rose to meet it. The ranch had become a world unto itself, cut off from town by snow and ice that made the roads nearly impassable. Clara didn't mind. The isolation felt protective rather than confining a buffer against the gossip and judgment that waited in Red Willow. She spent her days finding rhythm in routine. Mornings meant breakfast and washing up, checking on the chickens who huddled together for warmth in their coop. Afternoons meant mending or baking or helping Eli with whatever task the season demanded. Evenings meant dinner by lamplight and quiet hours in the main room, the two of them existing in companionable silence that had become as necessary as breathing. But beneath the routine, something was shifting. Clara felt it in the way Eli's eyes followed her when he thought she wasn't looking. Felt it in the careful distance he maintained as if afraid to stand too close. Felt it in her own racing pulse when their hands accidentally touched, reaching for the same serving spoon, or when they passed each other in the narrow hallway. They were dancing around something neither wanted to name, circling it like wary animals around a trap that might be food or might be danger. It was Eli who finally stumbled. They were in the barn on a particularly bitter afternoon, Eli showing Clara how to check a horse's teeth to estimate age. He stood behind her, his hands guiding hers as she carefully lifted the mare's lip, his breath warm against her ear as he explained what to look for. See that wear pattern? That tells you she's between 8 and 10 years old. And if you look here, Clara turned her head to ask a question and found his face inches from hers. Their eyes met and held, and for a breathless moment neither of them moved. She could see the conflict in his expression, want warring with propriety desire, fighting against the ghost of his wife. Then he stepped back abruptly, nearly stumbling over a bucket. There's work in the tack room. You can practice on your own." He fled before she could respond, leaving Clara standing alone with the horse and a heart that pounded so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. That night at dinner, the silence between them was different, strained, full of words neither dared speak. "Clara," Eli finally said, setting down his fork, "I need to apologize." "For what?" "For earlier. In the barn. I shouldn't have that. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." "You didn't." The words came out too quickly, too revealing. Clara forced herself to meet his eyes. "Eli, you didn't make me uncomfortable." "No." Something flickered in his expression. Hope, maybe, or fear. "No, She struggled to find the right words. "I wasn't sure what you were thinking, what you wanted." He was quiet for a long moment, his hands clasped on the table before him. When he spoke, his voice was rough with honesty. "I don't know what I want. That's the problem. For 3 years I've been a widower. I've known exactly who I was and what my life would be. And then you arrived, and suddenly I don't know anything anymore." Clara's throat tightened. "I'm sorry. I never meant to complicate your life." "Don't apologize. That's not—" He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "You've made my life better, Clara. This house feels like a home again. I look forward to meals instead of just eating to survive. I find myself thinking about the future instead of just enduring the present. But that terrifies me because the last time I let myself care about someone, I lost her. And I don't know if I can survive that again." "So what do we do?" Clara asked quietly. "I don't know. I'm 42 years old and I don't know how to do this anymore. Don't know how to court a woman or if that's even appropriate given our arrangement. You work for me, for God's sake. The power imbalance alone makes anything improper." "What if I didn't work for you?" Eli looked up sharply. What if I wasn't your employee? What if we were just two people sharing a house, sharing a life?" Clara's heart raced, but she pushed forward. "You could pay me in room and board instead of wages. We could be partners instead of employer and employee." Clara, that would leave you with no money of your own, no independence. I can't ask that of you. You're not asking. I'm offering. She leaned forward, urgent now. Eli, I don't want to leave. I don't want to save up money so I can eventually start over somewhere else. I want to build something here with you, and I can't do that if we're both too afraid to be honest about what's happening between us. And what is happening between us? Clara took a deep breath. I think we're falling in love. Or maybe we already have fallen and we're just too scared to admit it. The words hung in the air between them, bold and terrifying and true. Eli stared at her like she'd spoken a foreign language, his expression cycling through shock and fear and something that might have been longing. I loved Sarah, he said finally. I know. I still love her. Part of me always will. I know that too, and I'm not asking you to forget her or replace her. I'm just asking you to consider that maybe there's room in your life for something new, someone new. Eli stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I need to think. I'm going to check on the horses. He grabbed his coat and fled into the night, leaving Clara alone with her confession and the dying fire. She didn't see him again that night. When she finally retreated to her room, exhausted and emotionally wrung out, there was no warm milk waiting at her door the next morning for the first time in months. The omission felt like a door closing. Clara went about her day in a haze of misery and regret. She'd pushed too hard, asked for too much. She'd taken a good situation and ruined it with her inability to leave well enough alone. By evening, she'd half convinced herself to start packing to leave before Eli had to ask her to go. But when she went to the kitchen to start dinner, she found him already there, standing at the stove with a pot of coffee brewing. I forgot the milk this morning, he said without preamble. I'm sorry about that. It's all right. No, it's not. You count on it, and I let you down. He poured 2 cups, handed her one. I've been thinking about what you said last night. All day I've been thinking. Clara wrapped her hands around the cup, bracing herself for rejection. You were right, Eli continued, about what's happening between us. I've been trying to deny it, telling myself it was just gratitude or loneliness or some kind of betrayal of Sarah's memory. But the truth is simpler than that. He met her eyes. I care about you, Clara. More than I should, maybe, but I can't seem to help it. Hope flared in Clara's chest, fragile as a candle flame. So what do? We take it slow. We're honest with each other, and we don't make any promises we're not sure we can keep. He set down his cup and crossed to where she stood. I'm not a young man anymore, Clara. I can't offer you passion or romance or any of the things a woman your age deserves. But I can offer you partnership, honesty, a life built on something solid instead of something that burns hot and dies fast. That's all I want, Clara said, and meant it. I've had enough of burning. I want something that lasts. Eli reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. When she didn't, he cupped her face in his work-roughened hands. Then we'll build it together, slow and steady, one day at a time. He kissed her, then gentle and careful, like she was something precious that might break. Clara felt tears slide down her cheeks, but they were good tears, healing tears, the kind that washed away old hurts and made room for new beginnings. When they finally pulled apart, Eli rested his forehead against hers. I'm going to court you properly, he said. No matter what the town thinks, no matter how unconventional our situation is, you deserve that. I don't need courting, I just need you. You'll get both. And he kept his word. Over the next weeks, Eli courted Clara with a determination that would have been amusing if it wasn't so touching. He brought her wildflowers he'd somehow found blooming in a sheltered spot despite the snow. He read to her every evening, choosing passages he thought she'd enjoy. He asked her opinion on ranch decisions, treating her truly as a partner rather than an employee. And the warm milk returned to her door every morning, but now sometimes it came with a note. Simple things. Thank you for breakfast yesterday. Best biscuits I've had in years. Or, the way you hummed while washing dishes made me smile. Or simply, good morning. Clara saved every note, pressing them between the pages of a book like precious flowers. But their happiness existed in a bubble that couldn't last forever. Reality came calling on a bitter January afternoon when a rider appeared on the horizon, making his way slowly through the snow toward the ranch. Eli went out to meet him, While Clara watched from the window, a sense of dread settling in her stomach. Visitors in winter were rare and usually brought bad news. When Eli came back inside, his expression was grim. "That was Deputy Morrison from town. There's going to be a town meeting next week. About us." Clara's stomach dropped. "About us? What do you mean?" "Apparently Mrs. Hodges has convinced the town council that our living arrangement is a moral threat to the community. She's petitioning to have you banned from Red Willow entirely, or at least forced to find other accommodations." His jaw clenched. "She's calling you a scarlet woman, says you've bewitched me and corrupted the young women of the town with your modern ideas about independence." "That's ridiculous." "That's Mrs. Hodges, but the council is taking her seriously enough to hold a hearing. We're both required to attend and defend ourselves." Clara sank into a chair, her legs suddenly weak. "Next Friday, 10 o'clock at the church hall. And if we don't go, then they'll make their decision without us. And from what Morrison said, that decision won't be in our favor." Clara thought about everything she'd built here, everything she'd finally allowed herself to hope for. And now it was all threatened because a bitter woman couldn't stand to see someone else find happiness. "We'll go," she said firmly. "We'll go, and we'll tell them the truth, that we're two adults making our own choices about our own lives, that we're not hurting anyone. It won't matter to people like Mrs. Hodges. Truth doesn't interest her. Control does." "Maybe not. But there are other people in that town, good people like Mr. Brennan and Margaret Porter, people who might listen to reason." Eli crossed to her, pulled her up from the chair and into his arms. "Whatever happens, we face it together." "Agreed." "Agreed." The week before the meeting passed in a blur of anxiety and preparation. Clara practiced what she would say, trying to find words that would make closed minds open, that would make judgmental hearts soften. Eli assured her it didn't matter what she said, that people had already made up their minds, but she had to try. On Thursday night, the night before they were due in town, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind howl outside, and wondered if this time tomorrow she'd be packing her bags for good. A soft knock on her door made her sit up. "Clara, I saw your light. Can't sleep either." She opened the door to find Eli standing there in his nightshirt and robe, looking as haggard as she felt. "Come sit with me," she asked, and he followed her to the small chair by her window. They sat in silence for a while, watching the moon paint silver across the snow. Finally, Eli spoke. "If they force you to leave, I'll sell this place. We'll go somewhere else, start over." "Eli, no. This is your home, your life. You can't give that up for me." "Watch me." His voice was fierce. "You think I can stay here without you? Live in this house alone again? Eat meals by myself? Go back to just existing instead of living? I'd rather have nothing with you than everything without you." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "You mean that?" "Every word." She turned to face him fully. "Then marry me." Eli's eyes widened. "What?" "Marry me. Tonight, tomorrow, as soon as we can. If we're married, they can't say our living arrangement is improper. They can't separate us or ban me from town. A wife has a right to live with her husband." "Clara, you can't propose marriage just to win an argument with the town council." "I'm not. I'm proposing because I love you, because somewhere between warm milk and honest conversations and learning to read the sky for storms, I fell completely and irrevocably in love with you." She took his hands in hers. "I know it's not conventional. I know I'm supposed to wait for you to ask, but I'm tired of doing things the conventional way. So I'm asking you, Eli Thorne, will you marry me?" Eli stared at her for a long moment, emotions warring across his face. Then he started to laugh, deep and genuine, the kind of laughter she'd rarely heard from him. "What's funny?" Clara asked, torn between offense and confusion. "I've been carrying this around for 2 weeks. He reached into his robe pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I was going to ask you tomorrow night after the meeting, assuming it went well. Or maybe ask you anyway if it went badly, so at least we'd have something good to hold on to." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band worn smooth with age. "This was Sarah's," he said quietly. "I know that might seem strange, but I think she'd want you to have it, want us to use it as we start our life together." Clara's hands shook as she took the box. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything. Yes, Clara Wynne? Yes, I'll marry you, or you'll marry me. However you want to phrase it. He slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for her all along. They held each other as the moon set and the sky began to lighten toward dawn, and Clara thought about how strange life was, how the worst things could somehow lead to the best things if you just held on long enough. We could ride to the next town, Eli said as the sun began to rise. Find a preacher, get married this morning before the meeting, show up as husband and wife. Is there time? If we leave now and ride hard, yes. It's about 3 hours there, 3 hours back. The meeting's not until 10. Clara felt a wild rush of excitement. Let's do it! They dressed quickly, Eli saddling their 2 fastest horses, while Clara threw together supplies for the journey. The cold was brutal, but Clara barely felt it as they rode through the pre-dawn darkness, the stars still bright overhead. They reached the neighboring town of Sunset Ridge just as the church bells rang 7. The preacher, an elderly man with kind eyes, agreed to marry them immediately when Eli explained the situation. Young people in love shouldn't have to wait, he said, which made Clara smile since neither she nor Eli qualified as particularly young anymore. The ceremony was simple, conducted in an empty church with only the preacher's wife as witness. But when Eli spoke his vows, his voice was steady and sure. And when Clara spoke hers, she meant every word with her whole heart. I now pronounce you man and wife, the preacher said, beaming. You may kiss your bride. And Eli did thoroughly, while the preacher's wife dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief and declared it the most romantic thing she'd seen in years. They rode back to Red Willow as husband and wife, arriving at the church hall with minutes to spare. Clara's hands were numb from the cold, and her face was wind-burned, but she'd never felt more alive. The church hall was packed. It seemed the entire town had turned out for the spectacle, filling the pews and lining the walls. At the front, the town council sat at a long table, 5 men and 2 women, all wearing expressions of varying degrees of disapproval. And there in the front row sat Mrs. Hodges, dressed in black as always, her face set in lines of righteous satisfaction. Mr. Thorne, Miss Wynne, the council chairman began. Thank you for attending. We've called this meeting to discuss the moral implications of your living arrangement and its effects on our community. Mrs. Thorne, Eli corrected quietly. The chairman blinked. I beg your pardon. It's Mrs. Thorne now. We were married this morning. A collective gasp went through the hall. Mrs. Hodges stood up so fast her chair fell over. This is a trick, a deception to avoid the consequences of their immoral behavior. It's neither trick nor deception, Clara said, standing as well and holding up her left hand where Sarah's ring gleamed on her finger. It's a marriage, legal and binding. We have the certificate right here. Eli produced the document still ink fresh from the preacher's pen and handed it to the council chairman. The man examined it carefully, then looked up with an expression somewhere between admiration and annoyance. This appears to be in order. Of course it's in order, Mrs. Hodges sputtered. But it doesn't change the fact that this woman is a liar and a manipulator who tricked her way into Mr. Thorne's home and his bed. Careful, Mrs. Hodges. Eli's voice was dangerously quiet. You're talking about my wife now, and I won't tolerate anyone speaking about her that way. Your wife, Mrs. Hodges spat the word like a curse. You've known her for what, 3 months? You've let this stranger bewitch you, turn you against your own community. Sully the memory of your first wife. Don't you dare bring Sarah into this. Eli stepped forward and several people in the crowd shifted nervously. Sarah would have liked Clara, would have respected her strength and her honesty, and she would have been disgusted by the way this town has treated a woman whose only crime was being honest about her age and working hard to build a decent life. She lied. She shaved 5 years off her age in a letter. You've built a campaign of hatred around that. Do you want to talk about lies? Mrs. Hodges, should we discuss the lies you tell yourself about being a good Christian woman while you tear down anyone who threatens your sense of control? The hall erupted in whispers. The council chairman banged his gavel, calling for order. Regardless of personal feelings, he said, the fact remains that Mr. Thorne and Mrs. Thorne are now legally married. There's no longer any question of impropriety in their living arrangement. Then what about her influence on the young women? Mrs. Hodges demanded. She's been spreading dangerous ideas about independence and refusing marriage. She's directly responsible for Margaret Porter breaking her engagement. I'm right here, a voice called from the back. Margaret Porter stood, her face flushed but determined. And I'm perfectly capable of making my own decisions. Mrs. Thorne didn't tell me to break my engagement. She just reminded me that I had a choice, that I was a person, not property. And I chose not to marry a man I didn't love. If that's dangerous thinking, then I'm glad to be dangerous. Several other young women in the crowd nodded, and Clara saw Mrs. Hodges's face turn an alarming shade of purple. This is exactly what I mean, she cried. This woman is corrupting our daughters, teaching them to be rebellious and disrespectful. Or maybe... An older woman stood up. Mrs. Fletcher. Clara recognized her from the general store. Maybe she's teaching them to have courage. My granddaughter was about to accept a marriage proposal from a man who drinks too much and has a mean temper just because she thought that was her only option. But after seeing Mrs. Thorne stand up to you, she found the strength to say no. That man would have made her miserable, possibly worse. So yes, Mrs. Hodges, Mrs. Thorne has influenced our daughters, and I, for one, am grateful. More voices joined in, people Clara had never spoken to defending her, sharing stories of how her example had helped someone they loved. Not everyone there were still plenty of disapproving faces in the crowd, but enough that the tide began to turn. The council chairman banged his gavel again. It seems clear that there is no legal ground for action against the Thornes. Their marriage is valid, their conduct is their own business, and their influence on the community is a matter of individual interpretation. He looked directly at Mrs. Hodges. This council will not be used as a weapon in personal vendettas. This meeting is adjourned. Mrs. Hodges stood frozen, clearly unable to believe she'd lost. Then she turned and swept from the hall, her son trailing behind her, and Clara felt something release in her chest that she hadn't even known was tight. People crowded around them afterward, some offering congratulations, others asking questions, a few still shooting disapproving looks, but saying nothing. Mr. Brennan shook Eli's hand and wished them well. Margaret hugged Clara and whispered, "Thank you for being brave first." As they finally made their way out to the wagon, Eli pulled Clara close. "Well, Mrs. Thorne, that went better than expected." "Did it? I thought we were about to be run out of town." "So did I. But you know what? Even if we had been, it would have been worth it." He kissed her forehead. "Every moment with you is worth it." They rode home through the winter afternoon, the sky clear and bright above them. And when they reached the ranch, their ranch now truly theirs together, Clara looked at the house with new eyes. This was home. Not because it was where she lived, but because it was where she was loved, where she was chosen, where she'd finally, after everything, found a place to belong. That night, as she lay in Eli's arms, in the bed that had been his and Sarah's, and was now theirs, Clara thought about the journey that had brought her here. The lies and humiliations, the fear and uncertainty, the slow building of trust and love. "What are you thinking?" Eli asked, his voice drowsy. "That I'm glad Mrs. Hodges rejected me." He laughed softly. "That might be the strangest thing you've ever said." "It's true, though. If Thomas had married me, I'd be stuck in a loveless marriage with a weak man and a cruel mother-in-law. Instead, I'm here with you. So thank you, Mrs. Hodges, wherever you are. Your cruelty gave me the best thing that ever happened to me." Eli tightened his arms around her. "The best thing that ever happened to both of us." And as Clara drifted off to sleep, safe and warm and loved, she knew with absolute certainty that every hard step of the journey had been worth it to arrive here at this moment, at this home, at this love that had been worth waiting for. Winter gradually loosened its grip on the prairie, and with the coming of spring, Clara's life transformed in ways she'd never dared to imagine. The harsh months had forged something unbreakable between her and Eli, not the passionate, consuming love of storybooks, but something steadier and deeper. Something that grew like the grass pushing up through the melting snow, persistent and alive. The warm milk still appeared at her door each morning, though now Eli often stayed to share it with her, the two of them sitting in her small room, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of rose and gold. They talked about everything and nothing, plans for the ranch, memories of their pasts, dreams for their future. Sometimes they didn't talk at all, just existed together in comfortable silence that needed no words. The town's attitude shifted gradually like ice melting in a stream. Not everyone accepted their marriage, Mrs. Hodges certainly didn't crossing the street whenever she saw Clara coming, but enough people did that Clara no longer felt like an exile. Mr. Brennan started asking her opinion on which goods to stock. The preacher's wife invited her to join the church quilting circle. Margaret Porter became a regular visitor, often staying for lunch and helping with chores while sharing the latest town gossip. "You've become quite the celebrity," Margaret said one afternoon in early April, helping Clara hang laundry on the line. "The mysterious mail-order bride who captured Eli Thorne's heart." Clara laughed, pinning a sheet in place. "That makes it sound far more dramatic than it was. I was just a desperate woman who found a good man willing to give her a chance." "You're more than that." Margaret's voice turned serious. "You're proof that we don't have to accept the first life offered to us, that we can choose something different, something better even when everyone says it's impossible." "Is that what you're doing? Choosing something different?" Margaret smiled, a secret kind of smile that lit her whole face. "I've been corresponding with a teacher in Denver. He's 29, never been married, loves books as much as I do. We met when his school brought students through town last fall. He's been writing to me ever since." "Margaret Porter, are you blushing?" "Maybe." Margaret's smile widened. "He's asked me to visit Denver this summer. Said he'd like to court me properly if I'm willing." "And are you terrified and thrilled in equal measure?" Margaret secured the last clothespin. "But I'm going, because you taught me that being scared isn't a good enough reason not to try." Clara hugged her, this young woman who'd somehow become a friend, an ally, a reminder that her struggles had meaning beyond her own survival. "Write to me from Denver. Tell me everything." "I will." "And Clara," Margaret pulled back, her eyes bright, "thank you for everything." As spring deepened into summer, the ranch came alive in ways that made Clara's chest ache with joy. The horses grew sleek and fat on new grass. The garden she'd planted behind the house sent up tender shoots that would become tomatoes and beans and squash. Eli taught her to ride properly, not just sit in a wagon, but actually handle a horse, and the freedom of galloping across the open prairie made her laugh out loud with pure exhilaration. "You're a natural," Eli said one evening, watching her unsaddle Dancer after a long ride. "Sarah could ride, but she never loved it the way you do." It was the first time he'd compared them without sadness in his voice, and Clara recognized it for what it was, a kind of healing, a way of honoring his first wife while still making room for his second. "Tell me more about her," Clara said, leading Dancer to her stall. "I want to know everything. What made her laugh? What frustrated her? All of it." So Eli told her. About Sarah's terrible singing voice that she deployed anyway, loudly and off-key whenever she was happy. About her fierce competitive streak that made every card game a battle. About the way she'd cried during the first winter, homesick and scared, until one morning she'd dried her tears and declared that if this land wanted to break her, it would have to try harder. "She sounds wonderful," Clara said softly. She was. But Clara... Eli stopped her with a hand on her arm. "She was wonderful, and I loved her. But what I have with you is different. Not better or worse, just different. And I'm done feeling guilty about that." "Good, because she'd probably be annoyed with you for moping around so long." Eli laughed, surprised. "You're absolutely right. She hated self-pity. Used to tell me to either fix the problem or stop complaining about it. I like her more and more." That night, lying in bed with Eli's arm around her, Clara thought about the strange paths that had led her here. If Thomas Hodges had accepted her, she'd be trapped in a loveless marriage right now, serving a cruel mother-in-law and probably already pregnant with a child conceived out of duty rather than love. Instead, she was here in the arms of a man who valued her mind as much as her body, who treated her as a partner rather than property. "Eli," she whispered into the darkness. "I'm happy. Properly, completely happy. I wanted you to know that." His arm tightened around her. "So am I, love. So am I." Summer brought its own challenges. The heat was brutal, turning the prairie into an ocean of shimmering air. The work was endless horses to train fences, to mend hay, to cut and stack against the coming winter. Clara worked alongside Eli from dawn to dusk, her hands growing rougher and her skin darker despite her best efforts to stay covered. One particularly hot afternoon in July, they were working on the far fence line when Eli suddenly stopped his hand going to his chest. Eli? Clara's heart leapt into her throat. What's wrong? Nothing, just give me a moment. But his face had gone gray and sweat poured down his temples despite the fact that he'd barely been moving. Clara ran to the wagon for the water canteen, forcing him to sit in the shade and drink. We're going back to the house, right now. We're not finished with the fence. I don't care about the fence. You're scaring me. The color gradually returned to his face, and the tightness around his eyes eased. But Clara's fear didn't. Eli was 42, not ancient, but not young either, and ranch work was hard on a body even in the best of times. I'm fine, he insisted as she drove the wagon home, handling the reins with white-knuckled determination. Just got overheated, that's all. You're seeing the doctor. Clara, I'm not arguing about this, Eli Thorne. You're seeing the doctor, and that's final. He was quiet for a moment, then smiled faintly. Yes, ma'am. The doctor came the next day, a gruff man named Patterson, who'd been practicing medicine in Red Willow for 30 years. He examined Eli thoroughly while Clara paced in the kitchen, her mind conjuring every horrible possibility. When Dr. Patterson finally emerged, his expression was serious but not grave. His heart's showing some strain, but nothing immediately dangerous. He needs to slow down, though. Less heavy labor, more rest. And Clara, he turned to her, make sure he actually listens. Stubborn men like Eli tend to think they're invincible, right up until they prove they're not. After the doctor left, Clara found Eli sitting on the porch, staring out at the land he'd worked so hard to build. You heard him? She said, settling beside him. You need to ease up. I heard him. Doesn't mean I like it. Liking it isn't required. Doing it is. Eli sighed, the sound carrying decades of weariness. This ranch is all I know, Clara. Working the land, training the horses. It's who I am. If I'm not doing that, then who am I? Clara took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. You're my husband. You're a good man who's worked himself half to death building something beautiful. And you're someone who deserves to enjoy the fruits of his labor instead of killing himself for them. We can't run this place with just you working. Then we hire help. We bring in a couple of young men who want to learn the horse trade. You supervise and teach them what you know, but you stop trying to do everything yourself. That costs money. We have money. You've been saving for years and the horses sell well. We can afford it, Eli. What we can't afford is you working yourself into an early grave. He was quiet for a long time, his thumb rubbing absently across her knuckles. Finally, he nodded. All right, we'll hire help, but I'm not becoming an invalid, Clara. I still work, just smarter instead of harder. Deal. They hired two brothers from town, young men barely 20 who were eager to learn and strong enough to handle the heavy work. Eli taught them with surprising patience, showing them how to read a horse's temperament, how to train without breaking spirit, how to build trust instead of commanding through fear. Clara watched him transform from ranch hand to teacher, saw him find a new kind of purpose in passing on his knowledge. And as the boys took over more of the physical labor, Eli's color improved, his energy returned, and the gray tightness around his eyes disappeared. August arrived with a heat that made breathing feel like work. Clara spent her mornings in the garden harvesting vegetables before the sun got too brutal, and her afternoons in the cool kitchen putting up preserves the way Sarah had taught her through the detailed notes she'd left in the margins of her recipe book. You're doing this for her, aren't you? Eli said one evening, watching Clara seal another jar of peach preserves. Carrying on her tradition. I'm doing it for all of us. For her memory, yes, but also for our future. For the children we might have someday. Clara set down the jar, sudden uncertainty washing over her. We haven't talked about children. I know I'm not young, and there's no guarantee. I would love to have children with you. Eli crossed to her, pulling her into his arms. But if that's not in our future, I'll still be happy. You're enough, Clara. You'll always be enough. She buried her face in his chest, breathing in the scent of him, horse and hay, and the soap she'd made last month. I want to give you a family, want to fill this house with the kind of life and laughter it deserves. Then we'll hope. And if it happens, we'll be grateful. And if it doesn't, we'll build our family in other ways. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. In September, Clara woke one morning to a familiar queasiness that she'd seen in enough boarding house guests to recognize immediately. She lay very still, hand on her stomach, hardly daring to hope. She waited 2 more weeks until she was sure before telling Eli. They were in the barn checking on a new foal when she finally worked up the courage. "Eli, I need to tell you something." He looked up from examining the foal's legs, concern immediately crossing his face. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. In fact, everything might be very right." She took a deep breath. "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the dusty air of the barn. Eli froze his expression, cycling through shock, disbelief, and then a joy so profound it made her eyes sting with tears. "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be. I've missed 2 courses. I'm sick every morning, and I can barely stand the smell of coffee." He crossed to her in 3 long strides, sweeping her up and spinning her around before carefully, gently setting her back down. "A baby. We're having a baby." "We are." Clara laughed, dizzy with happiness and motion. "Sometime in April, I think." "April?" Eli's hand went to her stomach, still flat but carrying their future. "That's perfect. Spring babies are strong." Over the next months, Clara's body changed in ways both wondrous and uncomfortable. Her stomach swelled, her ankles disappeared, and she developed cravings for strange combinations that made Eli laugh. Pickles and honey ham and applesauce bread soaked in milk. "You're glowing," Margaret said during a visit in December, now engaged to her Denver teacher and planning a spring wedding. "Pregnancy suits you." "Pregnancy exhausts me," Clara corrected, but she was smiling. "But yes, I'm happy, terrified but happy." "You'll be a wonderful mother." Clara hoped so. She'd spent the last months preparing sewing, tiny clothes, setting up a cradle that Eli had built from oak, reading every book about childbirth she could find. But still the fear lurked. She was 29 now, older than many first-time mothers, and she knew the risks. "I'm scared," she admitted to Eli one night, as they lay in bed, his hand on her swollen belly. "What if something goes wrong? Then we'll face it together." His voice was steady, certain. "But Clara, nothing's going to go wrong. You're strong and healthy, and we have Dr. Patterson nearby. This baby is going to be fine, and so are you." She wanted to believe him, chose to believe him because the alternative was too frightening to contemplate. Winter came again, but this time Clara watched the snow fall without dread. She was warm and safe, and loved preparing to bring new life into a world that had once seemed intent on crushing her. The irony wasn't lost on her. "A year and a half ago, I stood on that train platform thinking my life was over," she said to Eli one evening as they sat by the fire. "And now look at us." "Look at us," he echoed, his hand finding hers. "You've given me more than I ever thought I'd have again. Hope, joy, a future worth living for. You gave me the same, gave me a home when I had nothing, gave me love when I thought I was too old and too broken for it. You were never broken, just bent for a while." Clara thought about that as she drifted off to sleep that night. Bent, yes, but not broken. And now, with Eli beside her and their child growing inside her, she was finally truly whole. The baby came on a warm April evening, 3 days after Clara's 30th birthday. The labor was long and hard, lasting through the night and into the next day. Dr. Patterson stayed the whole time along with his wife, who'd assisted at hundreds of births. Eli paced in the hallway, occasionally allowed in to hold Clara's hand during the worst contractions. "I can't do this," Clara gasped during a particularly brutal wave of pain. "It's too much." "You can," Eli said fiercely, his hand gripping hers. "You're the strongest person I know. You can do this." And somehow, impossibly, she did. At sunset the next day, as the sky turned the color of fire, Clara's daughter entered the world with a cry that sounded like fury and triumph combined. "She's perfect," Dr. Patterson said, placing the squalling infant on Clara's chest. 10 fingers, 10 toes, lungs like a blacksmith's bellows. Clara looked down at her daughter, red-faced and furious, and absolutely beautiful, and felt love crash over her like a wave. This tiny person, this miracle, this gift she'd never been sure she'd receive. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome home." Eli stood beside his bed, tears streaming down his face, staring at his daughter like he couldn't quite believe she was real. "What should we call her?" Clara asked. "Hope," Eli said immediately. "Her name is Hope." Hope Thorne, born under the same Wyoming sky that had witnessed Clara's worst humiliation and greatest triumph. Hope Thorne, living proof that endings could become beginnings, that rejection could lead to redemption, that the worst day of your life might be the first step toward the best. The weeks after Hope's birth passed in a blur of sleepless nights and endless wonder. Clara had never known she could love something so fiercely, so completely. Every tiny yawn, every miniature finger that wrapped around hers, every moment of peace, when Hope nursed and gazed up at her with unfocused eyes, all of it felt like a gift she'd done nothing to deserve, but would spend the rest of her life being grateful for. Eli was transformed by fatherhood. He'd sit for hours just watching Hope sleep his large, work-roughened hands, cradling her with a gentleness that made Clara's heart ache. And every morning, without fail, there was still warm milk at their bedroom door, though now it came with a note, "For Hope's mama, rest while you can." The town rallied in ways Clara hadn't expected. Women she barely knew brought food and baby clothes. Mr. Brennan sent a beautiful wooden rattle he'd carved himself. Even some of Mrs. Hodges' friends stopped by with gifts, their presence a silent acknowledgement that perhaps they'd been wrong about Clara. Mrs. Hodges herself never came, but Clara heard through Margaret that the older woman had been seen standing outside the church after Sunday service looking at Hope through the window with an expression that might have been longing or regret. "She's a bitter old woman who chose pride over grace," Margaret said. "Don't waste your pity on her." But Clara did pity her in a way. Pitied anyone who was so consumed by the need to control others that they missed out on joy. Mrs. Hodges could have had a daughter-in-law, grandchildren, a place in a growing family. Instead, she had Thomas still unmarried at 22, still living under her thumb and her righteousness. It seemed a cold trade. On a morning in late May, Clara stood on the porch with Hope in her arms, watching Eli work with the brothers in the far pasture. The grass was green and tall, the sky impossibly blue, and her daughter made soft cooing sounds that seemed to harmonize with the wind. This was her life now. Not the one she'd planned, not the one she'd expected, but the one she'd fought for and built from the wreckage of her hopes. Better than she'd imagined because it was real and earned and chosen. "Someday," she whispered to Hope, "I'll tell you the story of how I came here. How your father saved me, even though he didn't know he was doing it. How this ranch became our home. How love found us when we'd both stopped looking for it." Hope yawned, unimpressed by stories she was too young to understand. "And I'll tell you that you're named Hope for a reason. Because even when everything seems lost, even when the whole world tells you you're not good enough, or young enough, or worthy enough, hope persists. Hope endures. Hope finds a way." Eli appeared from the barn, saw them on the porch, and smiled, the kind of smile that reached his eyes and made the whole world feel right. "Coffee's ready?" he called. "Come inside before you freeze that baby." "It's 70 degrees, Eli." "Still, come inside. I made breakfast." Clara laughed and went inside into the house that had once belonged to Sarah, but now belonged to all of them. The house that held their history and their future, their struggles and their joy. She settled Hope in the cradle Eli had made, then joined her husband at the table. He poured her coffee, she could drink it again now, thank God, and set out the biscuits she'd made yesterday. "I love you," she said, sudden and fierce. Eli looked up, surprised. "I love you too. What brought that on?" "Just everything. This life we've built. This family. I never thought I'd have this. And now that I do, I want to make sure you know how grateful I am." "Clara." He reached across the table, took her hand. "I'm the grateful one. You brought this house back to life. Brought me back to life. Every day with you is a gift I did nothing to deserve." "Then we're even." They sat in comfortable silence, drinking coffee and listening to Hope's soft breathing from the other room. Outside, the prairie stretched endlessly, the same land that had seemed so harsh and unforgiving when Clara first arrived. But she understood it now, understood that it wasn't cruel, just honest. It didn't promise anything it couldn't deliver, didn't lie about how hard it would be. But it rewarded those who stayed. Those who worked and endured and refused to give up, even when giving up seemed like the only reasonable option. "What are you thinking about?" Eli asked. "About how far I've come. From that platform to here, from being rejected to being loved. From having nothing to having everything. You always had something, Clara. You always had yourself. Your strength, your courage, your refusal to be broken. The rest of us just got to benefit from it." Clara thought about that as she went about her day feeding Hope, tending the garden, preparing dinner. She thought about the woman she'd been when she'd stepped off that train desperate and scared and willing to lie about her age just for a chance at survival. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone she'd outgrown like an old dress that no longer fit. But she'd also been brave, that desperate woman. Brave enough to leave everything she knew. Brave enough to board a train to the unknown. Brave enough to stand up to Mrs. Hodges, even when her whole future hung in the balance. She'd carried that bravery with her, and it had grown into something stronger. Into a woman who could birth a baby and run a ranch and love a man who'd needed her as much as she'd needed him. As the sun set that evening, Clara stood in the doorway watching Eli teach the brothers how to gentle a skittish colt. Hope was asleep against her shoulder, warm and perfect. The house behind her smelled of baking bread and the wildflowers she'd put in a vase on the table. This was home. Not because it was where she lived, but because it was where she chose to be. Where she was valued and needed and loved, not despite her age or her past or her mistakes, but because of everything she was and everything she'd survived. And that night, when Eli left warm milk outside their bedroom door, a tradition he'd kept even though they now shared a bed, Clara found a note tucked beneath the cup. "Thank you for being mine," it read in his careful handwriting. "Thank you for staying. Thank you for hope. Thank you for everything." Clara pressed the note to her chest, adding it to the collection she kept in her drawer. Someday she'd show them all to Hope, would tell her daughter the whole story of how her parents found each other. But for now, she climbed into bed beside her husband, their daughter sleeping peacefully in the cradle nearby. She pulled Sarah's quilt, her quilt now up around them, and closed her eyes. Outside, the wind moved through the grass the way it always had and always would. The stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance. And inside the small ranch house on the Wyoming prairie, Clara Thorne fell asleep surrounded by love, knowing she was exactly where she was meant to be. She had been sent back for being too old, but Eli had looked at her and said, "Then just be mine." And she had been his, and he had been hers, and together they had built something that would outlast them both. A family, a home, a love that had been worth fighting for, a love that had been worth everything.